Can you imagine walking past a small yogurt shop on a quiet Friday night and coming back just hours later to find it engulfed in flames, only to learn that 4 teenage girls were trapped inside, murdered? This is not a scene from a movie. It happened on December 6, 1991, in Austin, Texas. The shop was called I Can't Believe It's Yogurt, tucked inside a small strip mall in a safe, middle-class neighborhood. That night, firefighters rushed to the scene just before midnight, battling a fire that tore through the building. But when the flames were out, what they found inside would haunt the city for decades. Lying in the back of the store were the bodies of 4 girls. They had been bound, shot execution style, and one of them had suffered an even more brutal fate. Before leaving, the killers had set the shop on fire, likely to destroy evidence. The victims were young. Jennifer Harbison and Eliza Thomas, both 17 years old, worked at the yogurt shop. Jennifer's 13-year-old sister, Sarah Harbison, had stopped by with her friend Amy Ayers, who was also just 13. They were simply waiting for the girls to finish their shift to go home. Instead, all 4 lives were stolen that night. More than 30 years later, the yogurt shop murders remains one of Austin's most disturbing and mysterious cold cases. Despite thousands of leads, multiple arrests, and even confessions, no one has ever been held accountable. The case is still open, and the questions still remain. Who would do something so monstrous? And why? Today, we're going to walk through the facts, drawn directly from police records, court documents, and trusted news sources. No wild theories, just the real, unresolved story behind a crime that changed a city. To understand how it all began, we have to start with the girls themselves. To understand the weight of this case, we have to start with who these girls were. Because behind every cold case are real lives that were cut short far too soon. Back in 1991, Austin, Texas wasn't quite the booming tech hub it is today. It was a quieter city, home to families, college students, and a growing suburban life. In many ways, it still felt small. Safe. Neighborhood strip malls were a staple. Places where kids worked after school, where families grabbed frozen yogurt on a Friday night. That's exactly what I Can't Believe It's Yogurt was. A simple little shop. Bright, friendly, and unremarkable, until that night changed everything. Jennifer Harbison was 17 years old. She was a senior at Lanier High School, a smart, driven student with plans to attend Texas A&M. She loved agriculture and was active in the Future Farmers of America. Jennifer wasn't just thinking about her future. She was building it. Her friend and coworker, Eliza Thomas, also 17, attended a different school, Austin High. Eliza was described as independent and responsible. She'd just gotten a car and was proud to be working her own job, making her own money. She and Jennifer worked well together, often closing the yogurt shop on weekend nights. That Friday, December 6th, was supposed to be like any other shift. Jennifer's younger sister, Sarah Harbison, who was just 15, had come to the shop that evening. She brought along her best friend, Amy Ayers, only 13 years old. The girls had planned a sleepover afterward, so they waited at the store while Jennifer and Eliza finished up their closing duties. Amy was the youngest of the group. She was in 8th grade, full of energy and kindness. She loved horses, had just gotten braces, and was known for her gentle spirit. For girls, each with a future, each surrounded by friends and family, and none of them ever made it home. Imagine being a parent, waiting for your daughter to walk in the door. Maybe the lights are still on. Maybe you're watching the clock. And then the phone rings, and the world falls apart. That's what happened to the Harbisons, the Thomases, and the Ayers family. The horror of what happened that night didn't just ripple through these families. It shattered the entire city. The yogurt shop murders forced people in Austin to rethink everything they thought they knew about safety. Suddenly, the friendly strip mall wasn't so friendly. Suddenly, letting your kids work a part-time job or wait for a ride didn't feel so safe. And even now, more than 3 decades later, the pain hasn't faded. For the families, for the community, and for the detectives who still work this case. Jennifer, Eliza, Sarah, Amy, these weren't just names in a file. They were daughters, sisters, best friends. And their lives were stolen in a place where they should have been safe. But what exactly happened that night? Let's go back to December 6th to piece together the timeline of events, and try to understand how something so horrifying unfolded in such an ordinary place. So, what exactly happened on the night of December 6th, 1991? Let's walk through the final hours. That evening, Jennifer Harbison and Eliza Thomas were working the closing shift at I Can't Believe It's Yogurt. It was a typical Friday. Customers came in for dessert, laughed, talked, and left. Jennifer's younger sister Sarah, who was 15, and her friend Amy Ayres, who was 13, had come to the shop to wait for the girls to finish work. The plan was simple: close up and go home together for a sleepover. Around 11 p.m., a couple who had been in the store told police they saw two men sitting inside. Men they didn't recognize, who made them feel uneasy. They left, and everything still seemed calm. That would be the last known sighting of anyone inside the store before tragedy struck. At approximately 11:47 p.m., a passing police officer noticed smoke pouring out of the yogurt shop. By the time firefighters arrived, the flames had already spread through the back of the store. The fire wasn't especially large, but what it revealed was devastating. Inside the burned remains of the building, firefighters found the bodies of all four girls: Jennifer, Eliza, Sarah, and Amy. They were discovered stacked together in a back room, naked, bound with clothing items, and brutally murdered. Each had been shot in the head. Amy Ayres, the youngest, had also been raped and was still clinging to life when firefighters found her. She died shortly after. The fire, it turned out, wasn't the tragedy. It was the cover-up. The killers had set the store on fire using paper goods from inside the shop, likely trying to destroy evidence. The blaze did damage, but the real harm came from the water used to put it out. In the process of fighting the fire, most of the forensic evidence was washed away or contaminated. It's important to remember, this was 1991. DNA testing was in its infancy. Investigators at the time did collect samples, but they lacked the tools we have today to properly analyze them. They couldn't yet identify a suspect from a DNA profile, not unless there was already a match in the system. And there wasn't. Two shell casings were found at the scene, one from a .22 caliber gun and another from a .380. This confirmed that two weapons had been used, suggesting at least two attackers. The back door to the shop was also found open, which may have been the escape route. There were no signs of forced entry, and no alarm had been triggered. Whatever happened quickly and with horrifying precision. In the days that followed, police interviewed dozens of witnesses. Some remembered seeing men outside the store. Others mentioned hearing pops, possibly gunshots, but thought they were from far away. But without solid physical evidence, the investigation was already on shaky ground. One of the only promising leads came from the body of Amy Ayres. A vaginal swab collected during her autopsy contained male DNA. At the time, they couldn't analyze it fully, but the sample was preserved, and it would become one of the central pieces of evidence for the next 3 decades. Still, in 1991, that meant very little. There was no DNA database large enough to search, and no suspects, at least not yet. The public was terrified. This wasn't just a robbery gone wrong. It was calculated, cold, and incredibly violent. Austin had never seen anything quite like it. The case quickly made national headlines, and the pressure on police to solve it was immense. But as we'll see in the next part of this story, that pressure would lead to years of missteps, false confessions, and still no justice. Why would someone leave behind DNA and still manage to disappear? And how could a crime this brutal go unsolved for so long? To understand that, we need to look at the investigation, what police did, where things went wrong, and the suspects who would come under scrutiny in the years to follow. At first, the case seemed solvable. There were witnesses. There was DNA. There were even 2 shell casings, evidence of 2 different guns. But as the days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the case only grew colder. Austin police were overwhelmed. They had just 6 detectives assigned to a case that quickly ballooned out of control. In total, they interviewed over 1,200 potential suspects. And yet nothing stuck. Worse, the media pressure was intense. The community wanted answers. And in that chaos, more than 50 people falsely confessed to the murders. Some were attention seekers. Others may have been mentally ill. But every one of those confessions pulled the investigation further off course. Then in 1999, 8 years after the murders, a major development seemed to crack the case wide open. Police arrested 4 young men, all of whom had been teenagers at the time of the killings. Maurice Pierce, Michael Scott, Robert Springsteen, and Forrest Wellborn. Maurice Pierce had been stopped shortly after the murders, carrying a .22 caliber pistol, the same type of weapon used in the crime. That got the police's attention, but ballistic tests showed his gun didn't match the bullets recovered at the scene. Still, years later, police came back to him, and this time they focused on his friends. In separate interviews, Michael Scott and Robert Springsteen confessed to being involved in the murders. They described the layout of the store. They gave details about the girls. And at first glance, their stories aligned in just enough ways to seem believable. But there was a problem, a big one. No physical evidence ever connected them to the crime scene. And their confessions? They were obtained after hours of aggressive interrogation, without attorneys present. One of the detectives involved, Hector Polanco, had a long history of extracting false confessions in other cases. Robert Springsteen said he was told what to say. Michael Scott was even videotaped reenacting the crime, at the request of police, and before he had ever been formally charged. There were no fingerprints, no DNA matches, nothing solid to prove they were there. Still, in the early 2000s, both Scott and Springsteen were convicted. Scott was sentenced to life in prison. Springsteen got the death penalty. But defense attorneys pushed back hard, arguing that their Sixth Amendment rights had been violated, because each man's confession was used against the other, without either being able to cross-examine the other in court. And in 2006, their convictions were overturned. By 2009, new DNA testing changed everything. Remember that DNA sample taken from Amy Ayres back in 1991? Science had finally caught up. Using advanced testing, forensic analysts were able to extract 25 genetic markers from the sample, more than enough to rule people in or out. Here's the twist. The DNA did not match Michael Scott. It didn't match Robert Springsteen. It didn't match Maurice Pierce or Forrest Wellborn. In fact, it didn't match anyone in the FBI's national database. Springsteen and Scott were released from prison. No charges were refiled. And Maurice Pierce, who had always denied involvement, was never convicted. He died in 2010 after a confrontation with police. As for the DNA, that remains one of the most frustrating pieces of the puzzle. In 2017, investigators submitted the profile to FBI's National DNA Index System, also known as CODIS. According to sources, the FBI flagged a potential match, but declined to release the name, citing federal privacy laws and the suspect's protected anonymity due to incomplete marker overlap. That was 8 years ago. And as of 2025, the case remains officially open, but unsolved. The investigation now sits in limbo. Local police want to reopen interviews. Families want justice. But without a name, or a match, or a confession that sticks, there's nowhere to go. It's easy to look back and ask, what went wrong? Was it the contaminated crime scene? The coerced confessions? The lack of early DNA testing? Or was it all of the above? The truth is, the yogurt shop murders became a case study in what not to do during a major investigation. Good leads were buried under bad ones. False confessions were treated as fact. And vital evidence was destroyed before it could speak. It's now been more than 30 years. But the families of Jennifer, Eliza, Sarah, and Amy, they still don't have answers. So let's take a moment. Think about that night, about the silence that followed, and about how four lives were taken, without justice, without closure. But before we wrap up, we still have one more piece of the puzzle to explore. Because while the killers remain free, this case has left a lasting impact on the justice system, on forensic science, and on how we understand cold cases in America. So what can we learn from this? And is there still hope? It's been more than 30 years since that cold December night in Austin, and still no justice, no names, no answers. The yogurt shop murders remain one of the most haunting cold cases in American history. For innocent girls, Jennifer, Eliza, Sarah, and Amy, were taken in an act of violence so brutal, it shattered a city's sense of safety. And for their families, the pain never really stopped. This case didn't just leave behind grief. It left behind questions about how police investigate, about how confessions are gathered, and about how modern forensic science, especially DNA technology, might have changed everything, if only it had come sooner. We now know that the key piece of evidence, DNA found on Amy Ayres, doesn't match any of the original suspects. But we also know it belongs to someone who has never been held accountable, someone who may still be walking free. So we have to ask, who do you think is responsible for the yogurt shop murders? Do you believe the original suspects were innocent, or was justice derailed too soon? And could new breakthroughs in forensic technology finally solve this case? We'd love to hear your theory. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Your voice might just keep this story alive. Because the more people talk about this case, the harder it is for it to be forgotten. Thank you for joining us on Cold Case Mystery, the Yogurt Shop Murders. If you found this story compelling, consider subscribing for more deep dives into true crime cases. Some solved, some still waiting for justice. And remember, even as time moves on, for young girls are still waiting to be heard. Their names are still spoken, and they are not forgotten,